So our goal here is to give you some tools to mitigate the chances of your need to cancel completely, assess if you really need to cancel or postpone, if there are some options to modify or pivot your plans, give you a thought path to decide how to proceed in your particular situation, and empower you to handle emergencies swiftly and restore your event to normal operations. Um, so I found this article after I started thinking about this conversation, and I sent it to Amy and Dan just a few days ago. It was just published last week, September 17th, by NPR. So many music festivals have been canceled this year. What is going on? And this was a phenomenon that I was not really like realizing until I read this. But it makes a lot of sense. So just to give you a super brief overview, and then we can talk about it. In the 2010s, there was like a boom years of festivals and a bubble where there were new ones popping up all the time, right? You have like your top performers like Coachella and Bonnaroo and Bumbershoot and Outside Lands. But then like tons more started popping up because there was such a huge demand. The biggest ones were adding days due to demand. Instead of being a 2 or 3 day festival, Coachella now has like 2 long weekends. There was a total oversaturation in the market. By contrast, now we're in 2024, post-COVID. 60 or more festivals have been canceled between the UK and Australia. Burning Man and Coachella, your typical leaders, are down in sales. Why is this? The article gives us a number of things to think through. Of course, it's hard to assign exactly the reason for, uh, you know, more or less in each of them, but I think it's a combination. The first one is expenses. There was an explosion of production costs during COVID. Everything got more expensive. We definitely saw this at the festivals that I've been working on. There was a hesitation to raise ticket prices due to the economy, that attendees were tightening their belts. There's been similar downturns in other leisure and hospitality sectors, such as theme parks, air travel, hotel chains, and Airbnbs. I think like during COVID, obviously everyone's spending on festivals was down, but other things like home improvements was way up. And then by the time COVID was over, we thought, oh, there'll be this explosion in the market. And for a short burst, there was, where people came back and were so excited to do in-person events together again. And then after that, it sort of started tapering off. And I think that's what this article is sort of looking at, the comparison of those time spans to figure out what's happening. So I think that my biggest takeaway was a generational difference from this article. Dan read it also, and he said to me, "Oh, the Spotify and technology influence is also interesting here." But I'm going to focus on the generational differences. And I think that there's actually good news in some of these like oversaturated the festivals being canceled. Um, Consumer behavior one is leaning into only attending like the creme de la creme of their top choices, right? Taylor Swift and Beyonce appearances at festivals and on tours is really strong. Black Keys and Jennifer Lopez have had to cancel their tours because they're not selling enough tickets. People are only attending like their most favorite things. But when Live Nation, who owns a lot and operates a lot of these festivals, if you ask them for their commentary, they'll say things both large and small that offer great locations, talent, and a clear identity are thriving. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this book from Jonathan Haidt that's really popular right now called The Anxious Generation, where he looks at the generational differences between millennials and Gen Z. Gen Z is referred to as the anxious generation. They grew up online. They're statistically less likely to drink, smoke, do drugs, hook up, hang out with large groups in person, which, of course, is a lot of the behavior that we saw at huge music festivals starting in the 2010s. My take is that like big pop music festivals are maybe like they're still surviving, but they're a little bit less popular than they were. And that's okay because that's not what most of us are producing here. Like we're not working at Coachella, we're working at community oriented events. Millennials that have fueled the boom last decade are now older. They have kids, they have families, they have career obligations. They're less likely to travel out of town to attend multi-day festivals, standing in the hot sun in swarms of partying people sleeping in the dirt, getting drunk and dirty. My take is that this makes like the dominant entertainment consumer market, which is people who have money and some time in their 30s and 40s, they're more likely to attend community events that are family friendly, culture oriented in their local towns. They just don't have the time or the money to spend on like flights and Bonnaroo tickets. They want to go to things that are community focused, easier to attend, and more appealing. The other takeaway is that quality matters. Um, People are only going to go to things that are a great experience for them and their families.
And Sarah, do you mind if I just chime in really
Please, please.
quickly? Just to back up, one thing that you have clearly identified as your take is, people are more likely to attend community events. There actually is data among event researchers that does back that up. Again, one thing that I noticed in that article was that it referenced research out of the UK and Australia. And one thing that I've found as I've started to teach event management to undergrads is that I have found that most of the research about events and festivals is coming out of the UK. It's coming out of Europe. There isn't as much data or research coming out of the US. So but I think the U.S. has a long ways to go to catch up, with that kind of research that can speak to that. But the research that I have read does back up exactly what you said about, communities, people really valuing community events, things that they can take their kids to. It's easy to get in and out. They can stay at home. They can invite family to come visit them and go. So that sense of engaging with community events, there is data to back that up.
Thank you for chiming in with that, Amy. You certainly have your brain probably out of all of us the most on like current research coming out about fairs and festivals in a more broad way. A lot of us are like micro focused on the ones we're working on, but you have such a good sense of trends in the industry. Um, okay, but you still need to plan smart, right? You don't want to have a community event where you're unprepared. Um, so here are a list of things assessing your festival's risk, which a few of you have already chimed in with things you're worried about. Being in a hurricane evacuation path, of course, is a major concern, or not knowing how your town will receive a new event. Types of pitfalls that could happen in advance. I kind of have these in two categories versus the ones that could happen once you're already there on site, and how you might want to think about mitigating your risk in both of these different scenarios. So types of pitfalls that could happen in advance that I have seen or witnessed. A major artist or a performer cancels on you. The funding is not secured as you expected. Impending weather is headed for your location, but hard to know if it will hit. Your location, venue, or your site is no longer available as you expected. You didn't sell enough tickets, or you're really worried about attendance. Is it worth going forward? Things that could happen on site: natural disasters, weather, hostile acts, violence, environmental things like air contamination. We had just last year at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, the day we were supposed to do our outdoor opening ceremony, there was smog and particulates in the air from the Northwest wildfires that reached all the way where we were, which just things you don't think are going to affect you from 3,000 miles away, but nonetheless, you have to pivot. And technological emergencies. Hopefully those don't happen to you, but power utility failure, it can happen in towns big and small. Any others that you all have encountered that you are worried about or that you have seen? Please feel free to speak up.
I'll jump in really quickly. Brenda just sent me a message. The Blackberry Festival that she hosts in Lenoir, North Carolina. They recently had a risk management meeting and then discussed strategies for both weather emergencies and hostile acts.
Great. I mean, it's things you hope will never happen, but it's really the top two things that we worry about, right? When we're gathering large groups of people. So I'm glad to hear that your towns and organizations are thinking about emergency management and having meetings ahead of time. It's the smartest way to get ahead of it. So what warrants canceling or postponing beforehand? The circumstances that you're in make delivering the quality content that you promised impossible. I think that's the bottom line. That's the scenario that would come up that would mean we just can't go forward. Different variations of this, you're simply not ready. The correct amount of planning really hasn't been accomplished. You can't meet the community expectations for a smooth experience or succeed at your stated mission. Maybe the funding is not in place and there's no chance of getting enough donations or recovery or correction afterwards. You're not counting on a big grant coming in later that's going to, reboost you. Holding the event would jeopardize the organization's financial health or community standing or your ability to try again or produce it again in the future. Or a big one with weather and violence concerns, public safety is determined to be at risk. That's a no-brainer. You can't go forward. There's very few situations where you'd want to ever risk that. Even Taylor Swift canceled that her show was it Venice? It was somewhere in Italy, I think. Or severe weather is absolutely certainly coming your way. So those are the kind of like an initial rubric of things that we think about. Are any of these conditions present? And those are the things that would drive sort of more extreme decision making. Okay, so this is a personal experience. I'm just going to throw in some photos here for you to for you to enjoy. Normally I would never drag anybody through the mud, but I will never work for this organization again, so I'm comfortable doing this. It's a horror story. In 2017, after I worked for the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which was a delightful experience that summer, I was looking for a job that fall, and I worked for Taste of DC, and it had been taken over by a private organization. And they were not ready. And they hired me to do all their vendor management. And I will say that part was done quite well, if I do say so myself. We were on lockdown, ready to go with all of our vendors. But these folks had implemented these RFID wristbands and they had not tested the technology. And it was like Fire Festival, where they told everyone, all the attendees, they had thousands of people that had bought tickets in advance. They told everyone, preload your wristband and you're just going to swipe it every time you want a beer or some food or whatever. And sure enough, I will say, I told them in advance, you better go out there and test that your little radio wireless signal thingy machines are going to work. They didn't do it. And we were out at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C., and the little scan things didn't work. And the public was like irate. I had to take off my branded shirt and change because people were in the crowd. Oh my God, everyone was so upset. Anyways, so technology, this is a thing that might cause you to rethink your plans, but these screenshots are my own of people commenting during the event on Facebook about how bad of a time they were having.
Sarah, can you just forgive me for interrupting, but
no, please.
One of the things I think that's not to be overstated here is how important it is to, like you're saying, test, and in the moment when you're starting to experience your emergency, think about what your plan is. You have to plan for emergencies, plan for your plans to go out the window. You have to, rely on the experts you've hopefully surrounded yourself with and that you've built positive relationships with. These are things that I'm not sure you're going to get to later, but I just want to say, like, Sarah does such an amazing job, and you pretty much said it earlier, like bringing the right people together is just so important. But to expect that fires are going to happen. I mean, we're going to continue to go through all this, but I'm curious, Sarah, if afterwards there was sort of we always have postmortem festival meetings where we go through, because the time for blame is never when the problem is happening. And blame might not even necessarily be an issue. I think accountability is something you always want to discuss in a postmortem meeting, but understanding what went wrong sometimes is better understood later. You want to put the fire out, whatever your emergency is. This is a huge mistake. In fact, there was news of a vegan festival, I can't remember where recently, where they had two people working the gates, and there was thousands of people, trying to get into this sort of vegan food truck festival. And these poor volunteers at the gates were, people were out of water, it was hot weather. I mean, just what wasn't planned was such a longer list than what they figured out. But I'm curious, was the technology, Sarah, do you know, not working because it never worked in the first place? Or were there so many people? We know, sometimes when you gather in large crowds, you start losing cell phone signal, things like that. Was it an issue like that? Do you know, were you there for the aftermath? and did they figure it out?
This organization probably did not do a great job at their debrief either. There's a reason that I went back to my job at Smithsonian Folklife the next summer. I was like, I can't,
Fair.
this organization was struggling. But yeah, it was a combination of things. Yeah, they didn't properly test it. There was something wrong with the wireless. I think it was compounded by the fact that you had so many people in the same location and the cell signals were jammed up. And like you're saying, Dan, like staffing was also an issue. They didn't have enough people at the gate, similar to what you're saying about the vegan festival. This one also, wasn't staffed up properly. And part of what we think about a lot when we're building teams is like, the work has to get done, whether that's taking tickets or whether that's driving your artists around, whatever the task is this something that can be done by a volunteer? Is this something we need to bring in a contractor, a vendor or a company or an independent person to do? Is this something our staff can take on? I think being smart about the work that has to be accomplished and who that can fall on. I think at small organizations, I've seen over and over a mistake that's made is people say, oh, I can do that. Yeah, that's fine. I'll stage manage at the same time that I'm like passing out checks or whatever. Like you can't, you're only one person, and even the most capable people, there's only so many hours in the day. So being realistic. Yeah, go ahead.
And different people, work different ways and organize themselves in their work different ways. But for me, having an org chart and understanding your lines of communication is really helpful. Literally drawing it out, so you understand on a normal day when the weather is perfect. That happens once every couple of festivals, and when everybody's on time and everybody's doing what they said they were going to do, understanding how things are supposed to be working, but also so that you can then draw up the sort of emergency versions and emergency lines of communication. So when, power goes out at one of your stages or a fuel tank explodes at one of your food vendors, the right people know, is this a 911 call? Is this a radio call? Is this what not to say over a radio or a PA system where the whole crowd is gonna, hear it. Lessons I learned very early on. I embarrassed a stage tech because in my first year working a festival, I won't name any names here because I learned this that year that you don't do that. But and this is not an emergency situation, but it was just how to learn what not to say over radio, which is blaring from everybody's pockets or, over their, off their collars, where I said, hey, such and such a person, a woman has just come up to me and said she left her keys in your room last night. And so right, like you just don't know what you're communicating out there. So really think a few times before you say things publicly, and think about and plan in advance. That's not, again, an emergency situation. But think about when to use the lines that go to everybody versus maybe when to use your cell phone. And yeah.
Good job, Dan. Good job.
Little fun story there.
That's what we're here for, is the fun stories.
I'm pretty sure there was no divorces in the making of that story.
We hope, Dan. Okay, how to assess who to involve. I have too many slides here, so I'm going to keep it moving. But Dan and Amy, your stories are the best part of this conversation, so please interject absolutely anytime. If you're facing an emergency, whether it's ahead of time or during your event, we want you to pull together an evaluation committee that will give you some perspective. One person should never be making a decision like this that's going to affect a crowd and the future organization, the future of your organization and your potential to produce next time in a silo. Don't do it by yourself. Bring in other smart people you know. So you should have your event director or your festival director. You should have someone from your operations or your technical team. You should probably have someone from marketing in the room, someone who knows about your funding commitments, your fundraiser or your sponsorship coordinator or manager, and someone who knows how it's going to affect the artists or performers or your crafters, whoever you have invited in as participants of the festival. Trust your experts. I think this is a resounding battle cry that Dan and Amy and I have said for a long time. Create a rubric. Don't, emergencies imbue panic on people. So don't accidentally make the decision quickly, emotionally, out of panic or fear. create a rubric to assess against, decide if you're still able to fulfill your mission or your stated goals, or will you be too compromised and you need to make the decision to postpone or cancel. So make that list ahead of time so you're not trying to make it in the moment. Check in with your vendors, your venues, and your contractors. This is, mostly if you're able to make this decision in advance and you're not facing a fire literally on your site. But figure out if you're contractually covered, if you need to change the dates, or not pay in full if you cancel. If you're not contractually covered by that, see if they're willing to work with you, right? Reach out to them. See if your tent vendor, like, hey, there's a hurricane coming next week. We can't do it. It's too risky. We're going to postpone to the week after or 2 weeks from that date. Figure out how much will it cost you in sunk costs to either change the dates or cancel completely. And is it better to go forward with a modified event where you say, okay, we're going to shrink it down. We're going to put it in the high school gymnasium because we already like all of our money has been spent. We can't pivot to next week, but we still want to do it. So we're going to do it smaller or in an indoor location or something like this. Weigh in with your stakeholders. Amy and Dan, I know you're both good at this. Take the temperature of your most important board members, community members, and leaders. How will a change of plans be perceived and what should you get ahead of? Okay, what not to do. This is also a fun slide called Firefest. This is like the shining example on the hill of a terrible situation that was created basically by one guy's refusal to cancel or postpone. It's like, it could have been a great festival, but they weren't ready. They didn't have the funding. The vendors didn't have the resources they needed to come in and build the luxury tents or luxury boats or villas or whatever it was. The food wasn't ready. We heard these horror stories where the people of the local community of the island who owned businesses, restaurants, catering businesses, local labor who were building these structures were, they didn't have enough people. They didn't have enough time. They weren't being paid. And if you watched either of the documentaries, I think on Netflix or Hulu or whatever about this guy, people told him, smart people around him who he had hired to be event producers said, you're not ready. You need to cancel. You need to postpone. And he wouldn't listen. He was like, nah, you guys are just not, you don't have any vision. Like this, you're not fun. You're not cool. Like it'll be fine. It was not fine. Up to the point of people had already traveled in and they're on this island and the US embassy in the Bahamas, here it says in this clip, is intervening to try to get people out. So when there is a massive gap between the expectation that you have set for your event and the reality of what you think, what you're walking into, that's when you definitely want to cancel or postpone. Okay, so thinking through the implications, cost benefit, how much of your costs are sunk? Have you already booked plane tickets for, visiting performers to come in? Versus, okay, we paid an advance to the audio company or the generator company, the power guys, and they're willing to just apply that money to next month or something. So figure out what's actually sunk versus what can be moved in terms of financial resources. Insurance, I was hoping Amy would talk about this because she knows a lot about event insurance. What event insurance do I have? What are the terms? How much financial cushion can it provide me? Sometimes it's your saving grace. Sometimes it's not enough. You want to chime in on anything on that, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I can just speak to, any kind of event insurance that you have, and there are different kinds. Just, be sure you understand all the terms of when they can be activated, when something that happens can actually be turned into a claim. There is general cancellation insurance that does exist. What I have found in my research, again, I don't know about all types of event cancellation insurance, but the ones that I've explored, usually there's been, in order for that to kick in, so you invest in the event cancellation, usually the terms in order for you to file a claim, if you have to cancel your event, is the cancellation can't just be part of the event, it has to be the whole event was canceled. So if you have a 3-day event, the insurance will only kick in if you had to cancel the entire thing, not just a single day within it. The other thing about that kind of insurance is that sometimes it also requires that the cancellation is due to an act of God. It's not because maybe you had the foresight and said, I don't have the money to do this, I need to cancel. Most insurance companies are going to call that insurance fraud if you try to cancel in advance, not due to an act of God or something out of your control. Government ordinance, the pandemic, that was a big one. Governments were enforcing ordinances that prohibited or greatly limited the mass gatherings of people. And that's where insurance companies kind of went crazy a little bit back in 2020, and they changed a lot of their policies. So pandemics don't fall under that anymore. They won't insure that. So those are just some examples of things to think about with event insurance, and just making sure you really understand what those parameters are for when you can file a claim. The other type of insurance that I regularly purchased for the North Carolina Folk Festival in Greensboro was weather insurance. Sarah mentioned it before, and I don't need to tell any of you, we often, especially in the summer months into the fall, it's hurricane season. And whether it's a big rain or we can see the hurricane coming a couple weeks away, there are insurance policies related to weather where you can select, at least the policies that I've gotten, you can select specific days, specific periods of time. And if it rains a certain amount during those parameters that you set, you can file a claim. And the folk festival in Greensboro did file a claim a few years ago because of rain that fell during that period of time. So there's just a lot to understand about that, and about how everything applies, when a claim can actually come in.
Thanks, Amy. That's helpful. Dan, a thing that you said the other day, which is such an obvious thing, but it's not normally part of my thought process, is if you were to cancel, thinking about how it affects your performers. You were saying something about this in relation to the museum, Dan. I can't remember the exact scenario we were in, but it was like these folks, have non-competing agreements. And so if they were going to perform here, that means they haven't taken a gig in a 90-mile radius for the next however many weeks. Not that this can be your deciding factor, but just things to be aware of and how it's going to affect the performers or the participants that you've invited to be part of the festival.
Yeah, I think I brought that up more in our discussion about community engagement, but I think it's worth in this part of the conversation just echoing really what Amy said, as you look in every direction, and in this case we're talking about artists, like look back to your contracts and understand what you've committed to. I mean, if it's a week out, your contract may say that you owe 50%, it may say you owe 100%. You may have bought non-refundable tickets. You want to look into that. You may have you just need to see what you've committed to understand what your risk and what your risk of losing is going to be.
Yeah. And some of the funding comes with strings attached, and some of your funding probably doesn't, right? If you're getting a grant from the city, maybe they're like, hey, it's cool, we can just try this again next year. If you have a corporate sponsor that's come in and give you $10,000 or $50,000, they need some visibility, or they need some payback, right? They need some of the benefits you have promised them. There needs to be some kind of fulfillment for that. Amy, I was thinking about in 2020, when a lot of events just canceled. They just said we can't do it, or we're just gonna do a little live stream Zoom video. Amy hatched an incredibly innovative and intricate plan to produce concerts in downtown Greensboro and still put the sponsors who had committed that year, assuming it was going to be an in-person event, and really gave those sponsors the visibility that they were looking for, and was still able to fulfill a lot of those funding obligations that Amy, that you had taken on in getting sponsors that year for the festival.
Yeah, I'll just say kind of quickly, we definitely there was attrition that year. There were sponsors who said, sorry, you're not going to be in person. We can't give the money. And they had a lot of other reasons. They might have had their own personnel issues that they had to work through. But there were some sponsors who we were successfully able to negotiate with who, there were circumstances where they might have already paid us the cash. And given the circumstances of the pandemic, they didn't just out of goodwill didn't want to ask us for the money back. So what we negotiated with them was, okay, let's keep the money, thank you, and let's negotiate how can we, in addition to this year, give you some exposure through the digital platform that we're going to be doing. Let's also amend the agreement and we'll just add some for next year. I mean, so it was a mix of just trying to work with them on that. And then I will say the other thing, sometimes when you have to pivot, sometimes it opens up doors to supporters who wouldn't have supported you otherwise, because the digital platform is more valuable to them. The ROI that they get out of that is more than for an in-person event. So it was a mix of things that we negotiated with people.
And there's so much data available, in person, but also especially online, that you can report to those potential sponsors and all your stakeholders about what visibility they're getting. With that said, and Amy, I don't know if you saw this too, but it seemed like 2020, everybody very enthusiastic for online content. 21, I think we're still there, but then big drop off, and people just not really wanting it anymore unless you're working for Netflix or Hulu or the big producers. And I will just add though, and I don't remember if either of you were in Maryland at the 13 or 14 the Folklife Festival in Baltimore when the power went out in the Creative Alliance. So this was a festival that used to happen annually in Southeast Baltimore, and it was half inside a venue and half outside on the block. So kind of small size event. And for whatever reason, Baltimore City decided to, with no notification at all, just shut the power down on the block. The festival had already started, and now fortunately, our outside stage was generator powered, so we had power there. But we had thousands of people coming through the day, and we had some porta potties we haven't talked about here. We had some outside, but we only got enough, knowing that we were also partially reliant on the inside facilities. There's all this stuff suddenly that a good team. Amy, were you there for this? I feel like you were. No, you weren't. Okay.
No, this was a year after I
So it
had left
was
the Arts Council.
so a team had to gather and really think through all the implications and ask exactly like we're talking about here. Do we shut down for the rest of the day, or can we keep going? And ultimately, a lot of things had to be decided, including, Sarah, you're talking about quality of artist, but I think it's also goes back to relationship management. We had to remember who our artists are that we had scheduled inside. What are they capable of? Some of them we said, thanks, but no thanks. We can't have you. We can't, present you in a way that's going to properly represent what you do. But, acoustic blues artists we had set up on the sidewalk, moments later doing some, and we had a whole schedule on the day of sort of like street corner unplugged acoustic sets, and people loved that. The outside stage continued. We amended the schedule. I mean, we're literally sitting there with putting pen to paper on the printed schedule that we had out with a group of maybe 5 sort of organizational leaders, and then that the decisions we made there gets sort of distributed down the line. So little things like that affect everything. And as much as our focus is and should be, unfortunately, on things like violent situations or weather situations, you never know what's going to happen, like a power outage or the Porta John company, not to go back to the toilets again, but not servicing the Porta Johns as they should, or you're not dropping toilet paper at the Philly Folk Fest this past year for the whole first half of the festival. There was, for some reason, no toilet paper in the Porta Johns. So not difficult problems to solve, but when you're juggling 100 other things, it's not what you want to be dealing with.
The other part of this slide that I just want to emphasize is require and encourage your vendors and exhibitors to carry their own insurance. Big companies like audio companies, tent companies, Porta John company, they're going to carry their own event insurance. who you might not be thinking of is like your individual crafters, right? We had bad weather at the North Carolina Festival a couple years ago, and it wasn't our fault. It wasn't anybody's fault, but like massive wind gusts came in and knocked down a bunch of pottery, and people were out, in their mind, thousands of dollars, things that that they had spent a lot of time and money creating now had no value. And so we said it was part of our policy. You all should have had individual insurance. So it's a thing you don't want to have to say, but it's a thing that can save liability for your organization. Here's a picture of our big outdoor stage a few years ago at the North Carolina Folk Fest. And I was just thinking about Amy and I and Dan and others in our organization leading up to 2022. We said, okay, well, we've been really lucky the last 6 years, and we have put an outdoor stage and a bunch of people in a parking lot, and we haven't had weather. When is our luck going to run out? When should we cover this with a big tent? And I don't know, Amy, by good luck or good karma, said, okay, we're going to pull the trigger. We're going to pay another $10,000 for a massive tent, and we're going to cover this parking lot, because if we have bad weather, it's worth it to have our biggest stage be undercover and the party can continue. We can still have the concerts, we can still have the artists, everything will be able to keep going in the case of rain. And she bet really well that year, because sure enough, it was the first year in like 6 years that we had rain for a good part of the weekend. And she covered all these people in a tent, and the party kept going, and we were fine. So hedge your bets.
That was also the year we collected the from the weather insurance.
Being prepared. Being prepared, choosing when is the right time and the right year to get the tent, or to, make the plan to have one stage out of the 4 big stages we had that year at that festival. 2 were under tents and a third one was indoors. Only one of them was truly subject to the rain. And so sort of the the insurance policy of just having more of your stages be able to continue in bad weather and having literal event insurance probably saved the economic viability of the whole organization through decisions Amy made that year. Okay, pivoting instead of canceling, postponing. Are there alternatives? Can you make modifications? I don't want to harp on COVID. We've all been there. But I think there's this phrase of like right sizing has come up a lot. It's tempting to like see big, beautiful festivals from other communities and say, we can do that. The reality is you have to sort of cater to the audience you have, the resources you have in your community. I'm sure it's something you're all thinking through all the time, but scale your production to what the actual demand is and what the resources are. So if that means fewer artists, fewer stages, fewer staff, you can still produce a beautiful event. It's better to have something that's the right size, even if that means smaller, that is sustainable, that allows you to continue to do it in the future, than like shoot too big and try to make something massive and like you just don't have the resources for it. So that's my example on that. Things we had done at the North Carolina Festival that all 3 of us have worked on, we reduced when we needed to. In leaner years, or more prosperous years, we would scale up and down. We can have 4 stages or 3 stages instead of 6. It doesn't really affect the quality of the festival, right? It's more important that the 3 stages you have run really well. For the difference of $10,000 or $5,000, you can have a 200-foot tent or you can have a 100-foot tent and still have a beautiful concert, right? Like, don't get caught up in thinking you need to be bigger than you're ready to be. Just if you haven't played with stage lines before, the mobile stages that unfold, the difference of having a 320 or a 260 or a 100 is the difference of spending $10,000, $7,000, or $4,000. And Amy and I have looked at a lot of photos of stages in the streets and thought, okay, well, do we need one that big? No, we can get the 100 and only spend $4,000, and it's still going to be a great show, and it's still going to fill the streets with people, and everyone's still going to have a great time. So like, let's be realistic and scale back so that we can protect our financial viability in the future. Okay, so I have a whole section here. I'll try to go through it quickly about crafting your message. If you need to cancel, strategically plan your communications. Consult a PR professional if you can. Look at other examples. Demonstrate in your communication to the public that you have been carefully monitoring the situation and you have assessed it and you're making a decision in everyone's best interest. Frame it as being in the best interest of attendees, artists, partners. Keep it positive, keep it gracious and forward-looking. Be honest and offer to make good on any promises that you've made. Like, we'll refund your money, right? So you want to do two things. If you need to make this announcement, you're going to publish a public announcement, like a press release, you're going to put on your website, on your social media. Be conscious of the timing or conscientious of the timing. Pick a day that sits right. You don't want to like step on other big news or, you know, on top of a tragedy that is more important to your community than a festival. And also you're going to send individual emails or letters to ticket buyers, vendors, artists, contractors, volunteers. Focus on maintaining good relationships through the unexpected change. Offer proactive solutions to make good, refund ticket holders or vendor fees. Make it an easy process for them. Or offer that there'll be a new date announced soon. They can opt in for that or opt for a refund if you want to give options. I'll say Live Nation will keep your money. They'll say, oh, the Rolling Stones is canceled or postponed 3 years into the future on their next tour, and we'll honor your ticket at that. And like, get real, like that's annoying to people. Like, give me back my $200 I spent on the ticket, right? So bigger companies do this, and I think it doesn't earn them any loyalty or any goodwill among attendees.
A nice way to craft a nicely crafted message that we use on smaller events and at the museum up here in Philly is to offer folks refunds in situations like this, but to also I can't remember how the comms team handles it, but sort of says like invites them to allow us keep it as a donation to the institution. Right. So if you're a community festival, and I think there was a peanut festival and a blueberry festival, and there's some sort of like neighborhood type events, like these are your neighbors, these are your community members. With the right messaging, they might be inclined to just say, you know what, these are our neighbors. This is something we want to see happen. And, you know, they want to let you keep that $20, $50, whatever it might be.
That's a great point, Dan. I forgot to put that in this sample, but I crafted a sample message. You can use this if you want. You can just Google like sample cancellation messages if you need them. But
and on top of that, I would say, I don't know how many folks are using AI, but AI can be super helpful with this kind of stuff. If you get your stuff written out, maybe you feel like it doesn't have exactly the right tone, popping it into Chat GPT or something, it can kind of just play with your words. So like you said, Sarah, examples online, but also AI, this is where AI can be an incredible tool to help you.
Really a good piece of advice, Amy. Thank you. Just I put a couple examples in here if they're useful to you all. I pretended that Dan was canceling on me on this one. The Stars and Planets exhibit gala cannot go forward. Okay, a quick slide about regaining trust and goodwill. You know, it's not good news to anybody when they have to receive a cancellation message. How can you make good on this and regain their trust in the future and hopefully try again next month or next week or next year, whatever you have to do. You know, lead with care, make them feel cared for, be honest. You want them to still sign up to be with you next year for a future event. Follow up. Treat them as your neighbors because they are, as Dan said, like you want to keep them abreast of new, new status updates, not just is this event going to be rescheduled, but here's what's going on with our organization. You know, we're working on these new innovative things and this is what we're trying to do. I put in here, don't repeat. It's hard to cancel twice and save face. So don't, if you're going to plan it again, you better make sure you get it right the second time. Invite them back, write an intentional message that says you're invited back. Please join us again. Sometimes you can offer an incentive, a reward, or a discount or something for the future. And be open, ask for their feedback or their input. You know, we're interested in what the community thinks. Would you rather have a fall event or a spring event or whatever? Like gathering feedback can go a long way, making people feel heard, and you might get some new ideas out of it too. Okay, so this is I'm not moving through these as quickly as I hoped, but these were all examples of emergencies you might face in advance where you could sort of make the call early enough out before your event. And so now we're looking at a scenario where you thought everything was going forward, but now you're facing an emergency once the event has started, kind of like what Dan said, you lose power or something like this. Should you cancel? Can you triage? Some prevention and response tools to keep you moving forward. An emergency action plan, an EAP. We have this for, I think, every well-run event that I have been a part of. I'm happy to provide you with examples of this afterwards rather than digging into the weeds now, but basically figure out who are the points of contact for the authorities in your community, right? Fire, police, EMS. Figure out where they're going to meet. Where's the command center? If you have a hurricane coming your way, have a pre-established meeting location. Figure out the shelter locations. What are the parking garages, the libraries, the cultural centers, whatever buildings are around your site. Figure out where you're going to send people in advance, so you're not deciding this in the moment. Prescript your PA announcement language so that anyone on a stage or anyone with a bullhorn can say, a prescripted message. I have it here. Your attention, please. A severe thunderstorm warning is headed to the downtown area until 6 p.m. For your safety, please take action, proceed to the nearest area, et cetera, et cetera. Prescript all this stuff out so you don't have to be thinking on the fly as much. Bullet point the ways that the public will be communicated with so you don't forget to post it on your website. If you have people who are still coming into town and didn't realize it, put it on social media. Figure out how communication will flow on site and who has authority to make decisions and issue statements to the media, right? You want to say that to your entire staff, all of your volunteers, make this part of the advanced training. If we're in an emergency situation, whether the power is out, there's a fire, or the weather is coming, only Amy Grossman, festival director, is authorized to make statements to the media. Make that super clear to everyone on your team in advance so you don't have any competing chirping voices. This is just a visual example of an emergency action plan. Again, happy to provide these examples to y'all. They get used, it's a little extra work on the front end, but it'll make you feel less frantic in the moment if you know you have a plan. And a lot of times the police and the fire and the EMS folks, they want to see this from you to have confidence that your event is well planned and that you've thought of things.
And sometimes it's required with your event permit applications.
Very good point. Okay, so goals for hazard response. A lot of this is stuff that we bullet point out and put in the emergency action plan so that people know what the priorities are, right? Life, health, and safety of all persons is always your top. Then you want to protect, recover, and stabilize the actual stuff, or whether that's craft or art or collections, exhibits, research, loaned items. You want to protect and preserve facilities, property, assets, information. Then you want to manage the facts and circumstances to allow for correct public information to be released to the media. You want to stabilize the incident, begin recovery, and then restore normal operations. So these may seem really obvious, but sometimes just clarifying your priorities in order helps people move on the ground the right direction. Phases of emergency response, preparedness, make sure that you are complying with preventative measures in your town, mitigation, preventing the emergency from occurring or reducing the potential impact. Sometimes, as Dan brought up, it means diversifying power resources. We're going to have some things hooked up to shore power. We're going to have some things on generators. Same thing, you'd want to diversify your funding resources, right? You don't want to have your whole festival riding on one grantor or one sponsor. You want to have a diversity of resources coming to you. So if one thing falters, the other things can help compensate. Response, utilize your resources to address the immediate effects. You want to minimize suffering, damage, and maintain the speed of restoration. And recovery, you want to get back to a normal event as soon as possible. Hazard notices to be communicated. Again, this is a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's a really helpful tip that's tangible advice so that you don't have anyone on the radio or on the phone to your emergency services and saying, well, it's kind of bad, but we're not sure how bad it is, right? Like get your language specific in advance so everyone understands what they're hearing from you. A warning means, there's going to be immediate implications to your site. Like a lot of this has to do with weather. A watch means that a hazard is possible. There's a looming or approaching threat, but we haven't seen it yet. An advisory means we're keeping an eye out on it, but it might only affect a small portion of the people or a small portion of the site. We should make a modification so that it doesn't hit us more broadly. So figuring out your languages and being specific about that is helpful. Give yourself options in advance. These are examples that we have used mostly at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, but are applicable anywhere. So that when the festival director comes together with the stakeholders, we say, okay, here's our 5 options. Which of these things do we want to do? We're not thinking of them on the fly. We've thought of them in advance. We will continue to monitor the situation, but not take action yet. This is such a bad situation. We're going to cancel the day completely. We put time guidance on this that says like this should only happen later in the afternoon if we know the day is closer to wrapping up anyway. Option 3, the weather is very bad, so we're going to close for a short amount of time and plan to come back. We're going to send people to a safe, dry place to wait. We're going to give them updates on the radio every so often. Make sure everyone is in close communication so that we can reactivate as soon as we're ready or that the threat has passed. Option 4, the weather is bad. We're going to move inside and continue indoor stuff only. Figure out what is the priority, right? Like we've been in similar situations, as Dan mentioned earlier, where you're taking pen to paper and going through the schedule and saying, okay, this, we can continue this performance. This one, we're going to have to punt. And option 5 is that you're going to change the programming schedule, kind of similar to 4. But maybe there's so much damage in one area of your site or one street in your city, we can't do it over here anymore, but we can move everybody over here and sort of continue the programming as planned, but just in a different location. Okay, advanced trainings. These are the things that you want to have your resources and the smartest people around you be prepared, right? You can have really capable people, but if you're not all on the same page, it gets messy real fast. So provide your staff, crew, and volunteers, even everybody who's going to play any kind of part in this event, interfacing with the public to help it go smoothly so that they know what to do. So communicating with emergency personnel, communicating with the public, script the language in advance, media training and guidance. We mentioned this earlier, or I mentioned this earlier. Directing all interview requests to festival leadership, explaining to your staff, don't engage in political activities, protests, or commentary while you're on duty. When law enforcement arrives and before medical help arrives, these are 2 sort of trainings that we have enacted at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival that can help empower our staff and our volunteers and our contractors, people on our team, of what to do in an emergency situation. Even if you're not an EMT, you can help save someone's life by doing these 3 basic things, and it can, prevent tragedy if something like this comes up. So figuring out what are the advanced trainings that your team needs and offering those, even if you don't have a lot of formality around it, just know, like, maybe what are the like showing people how to do CPR. If you have a staff of 5, make sure everybody on your team knows CPR and basic EMT care. So I think there's a lot of trainings that you can offer that don't have to be super formal, right? You don't need like necessarily an EMT to come in and offer this training if you don't have that resource, but you can get some basic information from your local medical team and share that with your staff and say, this is something we want you to feel empowered with and be aware of. So different types of trainings so that your staff feels ready. This is a really informal picture of us doing this, but this is at the North Carolina Folk Fest, and I give this is our ops team. So they come in for the week right before the festival to help build out our site. And we make sure that they know where they're going and where they're guiding the public in terms of weather emergencies, where the parking garages are, where the shelter locations are, where all the generators are, if we have power or fire issues or whatever. So just taking the extra time on the front end to get everybody informed and prepared. We do this before help arrives training at the Smithsonian. This is an example, of course, of it's a bigger festival, so we have a little bit more time and resource to do this, but it's not something that has to be expensive. Our local EMT team comes in and offers this training to our volunteers and first-time staff for free. It's a thing that they offer for free, which is amazing. And it's scary thinking about potential violence or medical disasters at your event. But the feedback we've gotten is that from young staff who might have been intimidated in these kind of emergency situations previously, they've said, boy, I felt really good after that training. I think I could really help if we were in this scenario. So any kind of empowerment you can provide is good. Okay, we believe in you. Here's your last bullet points. Trust your experts. Cancel only if you can't meet expectations or safety is at risk. Handle announcement communications professionally. Preserve public trust as much as you can. Get prepared with advanced trainings for handling on-site emergencies, and reach out if you need help. Okay, that is the end of my slides. So I want to leave some time here for questions for Dan and Amy, our experts, more stories, specific examples from your community events or festivals that you want to talk about, think about out loud. What else can we offer to help?